So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sam, and this is my task five, my methodological identity for Qual. So, just as a brief introduction, we are going to be discussing the elements of my identity as a researcher through the lens of my mukbang project. Just to kind of define our terms, so mukbangs are a genre of videos on social media that are very popular in the US that depict either one individual or a small group of people eating large amounts of food in one sitting. These videos are really popular on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and they garner millions of views. There's lots of TikTokers or YouTubers that do mukbangs as their primary source of income. So it's a really big genre that is continuing to grow and emerge into different subgenres. And so, as we can see, my study was interested in looking at how does engaging with mukbang content shape people's perceptions of their health and well-being. Since mukbang is so new, it really made its way over to the States because it started in South Korea, but it made its way over to the West in about 2020, 2021. And so it's fairly new, so we don't really know what the implications of this content are yet. The body of literature around this topic is quite small and it's just now kind of growing. So that's why I was interested in understanding how viewers of mukbang content would describe its impact on their well being and how they view elements of their health. So I really looked at three main constructs. The first was viewing habits. So, like, how do these viewers describe their interactions with mukbangs? How often do they watch? What motivates them to watch? Like, what feelings come up when they watch? Etc. And then also looking at body image. So, do viewers feel like watching mukbangs impacts their perception of their bodies? And if so, like how does it impact the way that they view like their body weight, their appearance? And then eating behaviors was the last construct. So, obviously, mukbangs depict people eating large amounts of food. So I was curious to see kind of how that impacted people's own eating behaviors in their own lives and seeing if there was a relationship there. So this brings me to talking about epistemology. So kind of my approach coming into this project kind of involved both constructivism and critical theory. So in my own opinion, as a future researcher, I suppose, I kind of view things through both of these lenses. First, with constructivism, I think that health looks different for everyone. Everyone kind of brings their own meaning and experiences to health and health varies culture to culture, from person to person. Different people value different aspects of health and well-being, and different people have different standards. So their own subjective experiences create meaning for them. I also really subscribe to elements of critical theory. I think that there are larger forces that tend to be at play, especially when talking about health. And also, health is a privilege, and that can be taken so many different ways. Not only does that just mean like the bare bones of, having a roof over your head and having clean drinking water and access to food, but even more so, like getting to walk in a park is a privilege. Like getting to move your body is a privilege. So, just kind of understanding what are the larger systemic factors that are at play that impact health are really important to me. And that leads me to ontology. So, what is reality? What exists? I also take a critical approach to this as well, but also tying in a bit of relativism. So, for critical realism, I believe that reality is shaped through social constructs that are outside our control. I think there's a lot of systemic factors at play that really have an impact on how people view health and nutrition and their own bodies. And then also with relativism, I think that there's a lot of different realities out there and they each, are valid and hold meaning for people. And just saying that things look different person to person and each of those, like there's enough space for all of these realities to exist at once. So that leads me to absolute truths that help shape my project that kind of feed into the foundation that I built in prior slides. So there are a few absolute truths that I operated within for this project. The first is that, in my opinion, there is a thin ideal body in Western culture and society. And there are elements of fat phobia embedded in a lot of societal structures in the West. So that also kind of leads me to basically all of these kind of tie together, or at least the first three. The third being that people that are in larger bodies do experience disadvantages that those in thinner bodies don't have to experience. So all of these combined kind of create like they kind of lay the foundation for like what we're going to work within as far as looking at mukbang content. But yeah, I just think overall that there is a thin ideal and that there are elements of society that are not fair for people who exist in larger bodies. For example, people in larger bodies may have a more difficult time finding, an airplane seat or clothing that fits them in stores. So these are things that thinner people don't have to worry about. So recognizing that privilege, I think, is really important. And then that leads me to finally existing in a larger body doesn't speak to someone's morality or their character. I think there's a narrative out there in especially Western society that those in larger bodies are lazy or they don't value their appearance. What's not being talked about is kind of what factors are at play that really impact body weight. It's not just about calories in and out and physical activity. It's really a huge scope of what does this person have access to? What is this person going through mentally? Like, what is this person's financial situation? So, just overall, I really wanted to stick to these absolute truths, and I feel like they helped shape my project. And then, so some approaches that really spoke to me during our qual class, and I'm interested in doing more with in the future. I kind of narrowed down three. The first, which I feel like was my kind of approach with my mukbang study, was phenomenology. So, understanding the essence of an experience and kind of getting a feel for how people have lived through an experience. I think a lot of like narrative approach kind of goes in with that. So I thought that one was really interesting. And then also ethnography. So kind of interpreting a group and like a shared culture among them and seeing like what the group experiences, what do they have in common with one another. I think that if I were to kind of apply like mukbang to this, I could try to like immerse myself in maybe like some subreddits about mukbangs or like Discord groups and really get a feel for like viewers and how they, experience mukbang and interact with it. Or I could go the other side and immerse myself within mukbang creators and also see kind of like what are the behind the scenes of like that sort of content and how does it impact their life. And then lastly, I think case study is also a great approach that really spoke to me, where we're just doing an in-depth analysis of a case. So I think if I were to apply that to mukbang, maybe the case could be like one specific content creator, like Nikocado Avocado is like a really popular one. And so we could just fully make a case about his content specifically. Like we could watch his content, we could interview his viewers, we could try to interview him, and all of that to create a case. I think these three approaches really spoke to me this semester. So, when looking at responsibilities that I experienced and I kind of learned during this project in class, there were three things that came up for me. The first is that it is my responsibility as the researcher to create a safe space for my participants. I think I'll touch on that again later on in this presentation, but that's obviously really important to help people feel comfortable being vulnerable, especially when we're talking about such sensitive topics like disordered eating and body image. It's really important that people feel comfortable to share those really sensitive topics. And then also, morality, like I already discussed, is not assigned to food or body size. So just trying to keep things within that parameter of that judgment-free language was really important. And then also just acknowledging the systems of power at play. Like I said, that thin privilege and fat phobia that is rampant in society, in my opinion, I think really kind of lent itself to this project. And then some quality indicators that really spoke to me. The first was call to action. So, kind of asking yourself, like, so what do we do now with this information? I think, as far as like mukbang goes, I really think that the goal for me was to kind of understand what people experience while watching mukbangs and how that impacts their health. And with that information, viewers moving forward can have a more informed approach before coming to view this content. So that way they can practice like informed consent before engaging with these types of videos. And then also reflexivity and authenticity. So just checking in with myself and checking my own biases and really understanding kind of what I bring to the table as a human being. And then making sure that I am authentic to my participants. So keeping their voice in my data analysis and making sure that I honor, what they had to say. So, some reflections while doing my project. So, I do have personal experiences that I, as a human being, bring to the table, maybe without me realizing, but um, pertinent experiences that could play a role in my project. I have both benefited from thin privilege and I have also existed in a larger body. I have kind of yo yoed in my weight over the years. So, that's a really big challenge. And it's a really unique experience being on both sides of the pendulum. It's it allows me to really exercise empathy for other people because I have been in their shoes, people that experience fat phobia. I also have experienced that. And I've also experienced having disordered eating tendencies and poor body image. So I think that these combined just really allow me to practice a lot of empathy for other people and really allow me to understand the nuances of their experiences that maybe people who haven't, existed in a larger body or gone through an eating disorder, they may not know or understand. So I think just having that relatability factor allows me to have grace and make people feel more comfortable. And then also, like, to really understand kind of like what they're describing and as far as their own experiences. So these were some things that I learned at the end of my project. These kind of focus more so on like the data collection part, but I feel like I learned a lot through that. Obviously, my findings were really important too, but these are my reflections. First, like I said earlier, it's so important to create a safe space to make participants feel more comfortable sharing these vulnerable experiences. And then also embracing the uncomfortable. So there's going to be times when you're like doing interviews and collecting data that it's going to be awkward, it's going to be quiet, and you don't need to always try to fill that void with something. Like, I think for me, I kept feeling uncomfortable at times, like with awkward silence. So I would just kind of yap to like fill that silence. And I think that it's okay to embrace the silence, and sometimes the silence is needed. And then lastly, everyone's experiences hold meaning. So I interviewed two participants, and I felt like one of them was a lot more, had a bit more to say than the other one. And so the latter, at first was like, oh, well, this one isn't as good as the person who shared more. But I really, now that I've kind of gone through like the coding process and analyzed my data, I really don't believe that to be necessarily true. Um, each experience holds its own meaning. Just because it may be shorter or less detailed than someone else doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. And there could be still be like plenty to work with what I collected. So for the future, obviously my project allows me to have deeper insight into mukbang culture and the implications of that content. So I'm really thankful that I got to kind of dive into that a bit more. That's a topic I've been interested in for a while. And then also I think just coming out of this that I will have better experiences collecting interviews moving forward and designing future studies with kind of these things in mind that I talked about earlier. So that's where I'm going next. But thank you so much for watching.